Welcome to the For Love and Money podcast, the show where business and social purpose meet to inspire a movement for positive change. Here's your host, Carolyn Butler-Madden.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever and wherever you're tuning in from. I'm your host, Carolyn Butler-Madden, coming to you from Guyamigal and Garigal country, and this is For Love and Money, the podcast at the intersection of profit, purpose and leadership. Episode 102, and my guest today leads a business that I think is one of the most compelling examples of purpose-driven business in Australia right now. Not because they talk about it, but because they build it into every decision, every certification, every relationship in their supply chain. Abdullah Ramay is the CEO of Pablo Rusty's Coffee Roasters, a B Corp certified carbon neutral, fair trade and 1% for the planet business based in Sydney. On the day we recorded this conversation, Pablo and Rusty's had just released their 2025 impact report. I hadn't had a chance to read it properly before we spoke, but what I'd seen was enough to know that Abdullah and the team are not playing small. But what struck me most in this conversation wasn't the certifications or the commitments, impressive as they are. It was Abdullah's clarity about what purpose actually requires of a business leader. He has a phrase I keep coming back to. Profit and purpose are and statements, not or statements. And he means it in both directions. Purpose without a great product is just ideology, and profit without purpose is, as he puts it, a pretty miserable existence. We talk about his unconventional journey from Pakistan to Canada to Sydney, from accounting student to CEO, and the moment purpose stopped being a concept and became a non-negotiable. We get into the coffee value gap, which is Abdullah's term for something the Australian cafe industry urgently needs to face, and we close with his dream, not just for Pablo and Rusty's, but for what a new generation of purpose-driven leaders could do if they stopped seeing profit and purpose as a trade-off. This is a rich one. I hope you enjoy it, maybe with a good cup of coffee. Abdullah, welcome to the For Love and Money podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's great to be here, Carolyn.
So thinking about purpose in business, and I know that's something you have thought about quite considerably, or even thinking about business generally, do you think there's a role for love?
It's a great question. And I think the answer is yes and no. So let me explain. Now, without love, it's very hard to carry on things, right? Love is what brings passion, right? Love is what allows us to work long and tedious hours. And I think it's Warren Buffett who said that, has the book Tap Dancing to Work, whereas, the idea is if you love what you do, you don't work a day in your life. And I think that is true. There's a lot of truth to that, because the reality is running a business is quite hard, right? Leading teams is hard. Developing a product or a brand, it's hard, right? And there's a lot of naysayers, and especially trying to run a purposeful business. So without love and without loving what you do and loving your ideals and your values, it's going to be tough. It's going to be really tough. I mean, one of our values is passion for coffee, and you could call it love for coffee, because coffee is not the most glamorous thing. And if you don't love it, it's just going to be a harder slog than if you do.
And how can you not love coffee?
I know. I mean, we support people whether they drink tea also, right? But loving coffee makes it a lot easier. But on the other hand, I think, just like, to take a crude example, as a parent, we love our children, but sometimes we have to have tough love, right? Loving your children is not enough to ensure that you're going to nurture them and bring them up in a good way. Similarly, love is not enough, right? We still have to have competency. We have to run business well. We have to learn and develop and lead our teams. Also, we can't, I think it's good to love what you do, but sometimes we can fall in love with our ideas and love our, despite all the feedback we're getting. And it's a balance, because you don't want to fall out of love very quickly. But if the market's telling us, if our team's telling us, if everyone's telling us, listen, this is not working, right? This coffee doesn't taste good. that feedback, right, is quite important. Or if your finance team's telling you, listen, we don't have the money, we need more revenue, or your team saying your leadership style is not suitable, then love is not. So love is necessary, but not sufficient. It definitely makes the journey a lot easier. And, we are humans after all. It's, it's palpable when people truly love something and truly believe in it. However, more often than not, that's never sufficient. And you need to do a lot of other things. You need to be competent. You need to learn and grow. You have to have structure. You have to have learning. You have to be a good leader. And you have to do a lot of things on top of love to make a successful business.
That's a very wise answer, I think, Abdullah. It's love. Love is love, passion, whatever you want to call it, that energy that, comes through doing something that fills your cup it's part of the equation, but it's not all of the equation. And when you think about purpose, I guess, and I frame that question with purpose in mind, obviously, but a lot of people seem to think it's the magic pill, and it's not. It's so powerful, isn't it? But it's not a magic pill. You've got to get everything else right as well.
Yeah, I mean, I talk about this a lot just because it's a personal passion, and we have scar tissue, right, to actually learn when you're trying to create a purposeful business or you're becoming a purpose-driven leader, you have to come to terms with a lot of questions. Now, before I give these answers, I think it's important to preface this to say purpose is still, I think it's necessary, but if not necessary, it's important. Because, when I first went to business school about 2 decades ago, the idea was almost that, business is business and life is life. And I think this was even more prevalent before that. So there's this idea that we are some magical creatures, that when we walk into work, we can leave our values, our passions, our purpose out the door, do something for 10 hours a day, and then go back. And then in our life, find that purpose. And that's, I think it's a privilege to find work that you find purposeful. That idea that, business has nothing to do with purpose or humanity or making the world a better place is also a pretty dark and bleak outlook of the world. Because the reality is we cannot separate our values. Right.
Yeah.
Especially because work takes up anywhere from 40 to 60% of our waking life. On the other hand of that is that we have to understand that purpose in itself, right, is not enough. Because if we're running a purposeful business, then there's a second part to that, which is we're running a business. One of the questions I love asking if I'm giving a talk is, how many of us will buy a dishwashing liquid that's organic, right? It sports the forests, but it doesn't clean. Mm. And typically no one raises their hand. Because when you're buying dishwashing liquid, you're just trying to solve a problem, the functionality of washing dishes. And as well as in that decision, you are looking for something that's purposeful, right? Similarly, in coffee, it's like how many people will love to drink coffee that's organic, it's regenerative, it gives back to the farmers and to habitats, but it tastes like crap. All right, no one will do that because, again, there's a product. You want to enjoy the coffee. Whereas if there's a product that is great, let's say a phone, it's a really good phone. It's a little bit more expensive, but it has sustainability elements and it respects privacy. Some people who can afford it or value that may pay more. So when you're in business, there's still an exchange of value, right, around the function or the service that we're getting. And purpose is an and addition, right? It's typically not an or addition. And businesses that can do both, right, will do well. But to ask our customers to say, we're a purposeful business, so just buy from us, even though our service is not as good, or our product's not as good, that's very hard. That's going to be very hard. That space is pure purpose, which is NFPs and NGOs. And I'm lucky to be on the board of Westmead Hospital Foundation, right? Again, there still have to be service delivery and impact, but that's more closer to pure purpose, where we're saying, support us to get these outcomes. Even then, it matters, right? The delivery matters and how competent you are matters. But in business, we're doing a functional exchange. We're giving something of value. beyond the purpose.
I like the way you describe it, Abdullah, as purpose is an and addition in business. I think of it in business as quality of service or product is the cost of being at the table. Like, you cannot leave it behind. You cannot let something else carry it through. And purpose is the addition on top. And yeah, that's what we need, right? Because with so much competition around, what is that extra, that special sauce, that secret sauce you have that draws others in?
Very true.
So this is a good segue to, if you can share your background, and I can see you've had quite an unconventional path to where you're at, to leading Pablo and Rusty's. What are the key moments in your life that have brought you to where you are today?
Yeah, great question. And I think that my journey so far, and I believe I have a long to go, has been anchored by learning, curiosity, and some risk taking. So I'm a global nomad. I was born in Pakistan, and then when we're quite young, I was 10 or 11, my parents moved to Canada, a second home, country I also quite love, very different coffee culture. And I did my bachelor's there. I also worked there, and I had very varied sort of roles, from tech to starting a couple of ventures to being a research assistant on a few projects, one of them being ERP implementations, to automotive. And even when I was in high school or even younger, I was involved in a lot of different things, in robotics, in engineering, in coding, and I was student leader of a lot of different clubs. So I had something around leadership early on, and also something around learning, because I just loved learning around things. My bachelor's was in business and finance, which really gave me a good foundation on understanding strategy and a few things. And then I had a quite key trip to Australia in 2007. I was going on exchange to Singapore, and on the way back, I decided to stop in Australia. I had some family here, and I quite liked it. And I was like, okay, I'm looking to do my master's. Let's take a bit of risk. Let's go somewhere else. And the weather's a bit warmer, things are a bit different. Coffee is great. And by that time, I actually already was into coffee out of necessity, because student days and early work, you need the coffee. And I came here for my master's in 2011 as a result, after having worked a little bit. And I was doing some part-time work while I was doing my master's full-time. And somebody said, hey, Pablo and Rusty's we follow this company. They're a small company at the time, and they're looking for an accountant. And my master's was in accounting. So I was like, okay, let me go and pick up some part-time work, get some good coffee. I got the job. And to be honest, I wasn't planning on staying that long, right? I was probably going to do the normal thing, do my master's in accounting, get my CPA, and work for the Big Four. But I stayed, and the company, has more than 10x since then. I have had various roles. Along the way, I've continued my journey of learning. I am a CPA. I have a PMP, which is a project management qualification. I also have an MBA. I have a GAICD.
Oh my God, all the letters.
All the things. Again, not that they are important, because
no,
I
but
think learning.
Yeah.
But I've just always, I enjoy learning, and it's great to be able to learn as part of my job. But if I didn't, I would do it for free, because I just enjoy it. It really fills my cup. But I love coffee. Pablo Rusty, and I know you've interviewed our founder, Saxon, who's a great entrepreneur, but also a great purpose-driven leader who's creating business for the better. And the early team, we created something, like one of our goals is to have Pablo Rusty's be the best job anyone's ever had. And that doesn't mean the easiest. That doesn't mean that you don't have hard work or it doesn't have challenges, but fulfilling. And our role was to create the best coffee products that we can. Delicious coffee products that we would love ourselves to drink, but also to change the world for the better. And try, we're not perfect, but try to live our values. And we've been on that journey since, and it's really been it's been very enjoyable. And I think we haven't really scratched the surface yet, but we're making some marks.
That's so exciting. I love that that Pablo, that you had your eyes set on the Big Four, And Pablo and Rusty's a part-time job opened doors, opened your mind, hearts, whatever it is, but to something else. And it's led you to where you are today to lead, a business that is showing the way of what business can look like. And that's quite extraordinary.
Definitely. And also I learned a lot of things, right? Because when you're running a business or through various roles, I love accounting, right? Accounting is great. Although I couldn't do accounting all the time, but it gives you language to talk about business and understand business. But since then, I've learned about marketing and HR and IT and tech. And I had some of those strengths anyways, but they really, and strategy and design and all these other things that I've really enjoyed learning about. And while I'm not expert in them, but it's really, it just kept me growing and developing in areas that would have been harder to develop elsewhere, right?
That love of learning, right? Like a business, a small business that is set on growth, like that's got to be one of the biggest learning vehicles, hands-on learning vehicles you can drive.
100%.
And what a ride, what a ride. So that makes sense because I read somewhere that there's a phrase you use about yourself that you love solving problems at the crossroads of business strategy, people, technology, and execution. And what you've just shared, your background now makes sense because I was thinking, well, where does the technology come in? And that's, what you started in Canada, I guess. So it's given you a very sort of wide lens, which I imagine is very, very valuable for navigating and leading a business today in today's environment.
Yeah, I mean, I was always good with computers. I had two sisters, they both studied computer science. And while I never formally studied it, I was coding from a young age. I was one of the student leaders for the coding club at my high school. And I sort of kept up. I wouldn't call myself a coder now, but I can still understand code. With all the AI stuff now, I actually have gotten back into coding a little bit, and I enjoy that. And also had that very early research I was part of in ERP implementations in Canadian public companies. And one of the insights, which was a formative insight, was that technology transformations, right, are only 25 to 30% about technology. And the rest is about strategy, alignment, stakeholder buy-in, and behavioral change. And what people don't realize is even until now, a large percentage of technology transformations fail. Fail meaning they fail to deliver the business outcomes that people set out to go. And this is more relevant now than ever. And the reason is because the technology aspect actually, while it's not easy and you need very smart people to deliver it, is actually not the hard part. It's actually the everything else. Number one is like AI, and I love AI more than everyone. But it's like everyone wants an AI. They need an AI strategy and they want an AI solution. But it's like, what business problem are we solving, and what business outcomes are we at? So everything is a strategic. It starts from strategy, and then it comes to team alignment, and ultimately execution. Right? Execution is all about getting. Everyone can have great ideas, right? And the great thing about strategy is good strategy is no wrong answers. They're just different answers. They're choices, as long as they're aligned. But if we can't execute, and that's one of the reasons I have a project management certification, is because early on, I realized that without execution, and having a very good culture and muscle and process of project management and execution, our ideas will never come to see the light of day. So I studied project management, and we actually did some internal courses. We still have internal courses that every single people leader has to go through, which is, a 3 hours sort of introduction to project management and how to control projects. Because without projects, projects, what is a project? You have set goals, set time, set scope, and you're trying to deliver it. And you have to take care of the business requirements, of the technical requirements, and the people and the behavioral change. And without project management and change management, you can't actually progress. And it's as more important today than it was ever before, because the pace of change in the external environment and the internal environment is more than ever before.
Yeah. And that execution needs to keep up with all the technology changes that are coming in place. And then you have to have alignment of behavior, like making sure people are using it as it needs to be used, and focused on, what are the outcomes we're delivering. Yeah, it's navigating a business today is not for the faint-hearted. but it's got to be an exciting ride as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some aspects, it's the most exciting time ever because small businesses, medium businesses can have an outside impact, really small giants. I think the business paradigm has shifted. So there's a room for values and purpose, and also technology and intersection of leadership is really driving some meaningful change. But at the same time, the level of change and the pace of change and how quickly things can change has never been greater. So
crazy time.
It is a ride.
So let's talk about Pablo and Rusty's. Actually, no, before we do that, I just want to go a little bit deeper on you. One last question, and that is, when in that lead up, when in your journey did the purpose penny drop? When did that really land in you as this is important? Because clearly it is, from what I've read. Clearly it's driver for you, and you're a commercially astute business leader. When did it drop? How did that form?
Yeah, I think great question. And to be honest, I've thought about that, and there's no clear point. However, so when I had, when I was even in university and I was coming out, if you remember, the GFC happened, and I was in North America. So there was a clear sense in the business world, and that's where Sarbanes-Oxley came in. And I remember ethics became, because it was during my bachelor's that all of this happened, and all of a sudden everyone's like, ethics is really important. Hey, and we got to take this seriously. So there was an idea that this idea that business without values and any concern for other stakeholders, this can't continue. And Harvard has this idea of capitalism 2.0 coming out at the same time. So the seeds were there. And I think because I was in North America, seeing the devastation, really, that business unhinged can cause for normal peoples everywhere, right? Out of the GFC and other things. And also, also other sustainability things that happened at the same time. So I knew deep down that, I would it's a pretty miserable idea that we're going to work in places where those places don't align with our values. And then when I came, so that was always on a wish list. And I think when I came and joined Pablo Rusty's, I found, a lot of kindred spirits. And, Saxon, from day one, I think he's been, even behind closed doors, it's been very clear that while we understand balance, because we can't also be idealistic, we're trying to move the needle, not just about whether we can market it, not just about, whether it's going to lead to long-term value, but also sometimes because that's the right thing to do, and that's in line with our values. Whether it's buying better coffee, whether it's paying people right, whether it's making sure that our customers, from early days, we made decisions that in the short term weren't good business decisions, but so that our customers can be more sustainable, like cafes and so forth. And even now, one of the big passions I have is I often talk about a topic that's very uncomfortable, which is that coffee prices in Australia are too low. And while no one likes talking about
really?
Yes, they're too low.
Wow.
They're too low. So in the OECD, just because, again, I have to get this out to your listeners, the OECD average, or let me ask you, what do you think the OECD average for a small flat white is?
Oh, I would have thought, I've always thought Australian prices on coffee are high, like compared to Europe.
Yeah.
I would have thought, I don't know, maybe $3.50, $4 for a cup.
So the average is about $9 Australian.
No.
So if you take Europe and exclude Italy, right? But even Italy, because things work differently. Yeah? So you can have espresso for €1 or €2, but that's if you're just standing up, having an espresso and going.
Yeah.
If you're sitting in, there's a table charge, and there's all these other charges, and it's in Euro. In the US, you're looking at easily $9, $10, $11 before taxes. Yeah. So in Australia, espresso-based coffee prices are extremely low. Extremely low. And we do a lot of, we've done a lot of surveys. So we did a survey last year, and we actually asked the public about this. Anyways, without going too much into it, at the same time, cafe profitability is under 3%. And we have had 1 in 9 cafes close. And so when we talk about sustainability, it's about the sustainability of the whole supply chain. So early on, even we were making decisions where we want our cafes to waste less coffee, for example, from day one. Even though if they wasted a little bit more coffee, that actually goes directly to our profit and bottom line. However, in the long term, those customers are not sustainable, and it's not the right thing to do. So we would do things like that from the early days, and that then and early on 2015 is, I think, when we started. We read "Let My People Go Surfing" from
Yvonne Chouinard from Patagonia.
Patagonia, as a team, as a leadership team. I mean, until now, we read a book every quarter or every month and discuss it, and that sort of laid a framework. And then, led by Saxon and the leadership team, we became a B Corp, and then we've just continued on that journey, right? And eventually we became 1% of the planet, and committing to 1% of the revenue. So it's always something that I knew deep down, that because it's just miserable, right? Like, I just think it's a miserable existence to say, and I think it's actually not possible. The amount of cognitive dissonance we would have. And I say this from a privileged position. I recognize a lot of people around the world and in Australia, you need a job, right? And when you need a job and need to put food on the table and a roof on your head, you don't have the luxury of finding an employer that is in tune with your values. However, we can all aspire to say that it's actually not possible as a human to leave your values on the door. Right? Maybe not 100% of values, but taking enough of them inside the door. I think, like, I've had the privilege to be able to live them and help shape some of them in recent years.
It's interesting, isn't it, Abdullah? Because, as you say, we acknowledge we're privileged. Listeners of this podcast, most likely, in a privileged position compared to some people in the world and even in Australia. But that idea of leaving your values at the door, as the problems in the world mount and become bigger and more evident, and people can't ignore them anymore, they're in your face. I think more and more people, not just young people, more and more people are actually facing that truth of having to, make some decisions about their values. And it's not as if you can make every decision aligned with those values or with purpose or ethics or sustainability. But the fact is, I see more and more people selectively making those decisions. And that also goes to work, where you work. And that is a younger generation trait, clearly. I'm sure you see it. Before we dive back in, a quick word from me. If you're enjoying this conversation, you might want to know that I work with leaders and organisations on how purpose becomes a powerful driver of trust, performance, and resilience. I speak at leadership conferences and company events about how purpose shows up where it matters most, in leadership, in culture, and in strategy, helping organisations grow with clarity and confidence in a changing world. You can find out more at my website, carolynbutlermadden.com. Now, back to the episode. Let's talk about Pablo and Rusty's. For someone who doesn't know who Pablo and Rusty's is, can you share about this company?
Yeah. So, I mean, why do we exist, right? If you don't know about us, and we exist to make delicious coffee products and to change the world for the better. And over time, what that's meant for us is to protect and restore habitats specifically. Because one, coffee is grown in nature for now. So if habitats are not protected, then there's no coffee tomorrow. And climate change is a big risk. Also, coffee as being a crop also impacts habitats. So then we also have a duty to do that. And for us, that can relate to, doing and partnering with the Takanya forest that we have here, tree planting, Surfrider Foundation, anything that's to do with protecting or restoring habitats. Typically, that's where our 1% for the planet partnership goes to. So every time you buy from us, 1% of revenue, not profit, goes in a certified way to for-profit, for planet causes. And that's what we're about. Delicious coffee first, right? So we don't want you to buy bad coffee. I think it's some of the best coffee you can find. We are a coffee company first and at the cutting edge of what coffee is. And while you do that, you also change the world for the better.
Fantastic. And what are the locations? Where is Pablo and Rusty's located?
Our physical roastery is based in North Ryde
Yep.
in Sydney. We have two flagship cafes, one in Sydney and one in Brisbane. But our cafe partners are all over Australia, more so in New South Wales, but in Queensland and Victoria, other places. And then online and through other partners, you can find our products anywhere, right?
Yeah.
If you're in Australia.
Yeah.
And potentially beyond.
Yeah, fantastic. You've talked about wanting Pablo and Rusty's to be not just the best coffee roastery in the world, but also the best for the world. That's an audacious ambition. And I just saw, I couldn't read it in detail, but I saw your 2025 impact report just dropped this morning, yes. I think it was. It was like, oh my God, I need to. And your ambitions are audacious. Can you share what some of those ambitions are?
Yes. And again, I think there's the big ambition, there's the small ambition. The small ambition is the milestones that keep us going forward. So when we look at 2030, we want to have contributed over $1 million under the 1% for the planet in our lifetime. We want to be on track for the net zero 2050 goals. And we want one of our blends to be a regenerative blend, because regenerative agriculture is the next frontier. That's agriculture that is not just producing great products, but also doing it in a way that's not just not impacting the habitat, but restoring the habitat. So those are some, milestones for the near term. The other thing is, I think when we say the best roastery for the world, we don't mean the biggest roastery in the world. However, making impact through our actions, but also exemplifying what can be, right? So while we love when we have to compete, whether it's for coffee quality or for purpose. So if more companies are B Corp now, which they are, right? When we joined B Corp, there was a very handful of coffee companies, and now it's a real trend in specialty coffee, and that's a good thing. Right? The world's better for it. When we were one of the first carbon neutral organizations under Climate Active, and there are more organizations now, and that's a good thing. And if more people are under the 1% for the planet banner or doing more things to restore habitats, that's a good thing, right? Now, again, I think we have a competitive gene, so we want to do better. But that's a good sort of competition. So it's like other people are raising the bar. Yeah. We can still applaud them, right? We don't have to cut them down, because we all share a planet. And I think what we see is that number one, change has to start from ourselves. So our products, our supply chains have to improve every year. And we've also integrated doing good at the model level, so that we have the 1% for the planet. And we want to keep ourselves honest, and that's where the B Corp and the carbon neutral comes, which is a very public certification. But then we want to exemplify and give ideas to other businesses, large and small, to say, no, we can do things for the better. And part of that, again, I think it's not just sustainability. We mean holistically sustainable. That means the farmers are taken care of, but so are the cafes taken care of, right? And the staff that work in them. So we want to advocate as much as possible and make changes, by example, in the whole supply chain.
Thank you. The ambitions that you shared seem ambitious. For context, can you give me a sense of the size of the business, like in number of employees or revenue, whatever?
So we're about 50 sort of roastery team members. And then we have a few cafes, so we're 70 to 80 in number. So what I would say, like we're in the middle of what's considered the medium-sized enterprise.
So those goals are ambitious. So which is wonderful, because that's how change happens, doesn't it? Innovation happens when you've got big ambitious goals that you want them to be realistic, but you also want them to be ambitious enough to force people to change the way they think.
Definitely. And I think the challenge with goals is, they can be so far out that they're not achievable, and that can demotivate everyone. But they can also be so achievable that, they become too comfortable. So we try to always find what the stretch is through discussion with our team, seeing where we feel like. And I think the idea is that, as they say, big, hairy, audacious goals, and they're good. And the reality is, again, I think, and a lot of the younger generation, and sometimes our customers might push us on things to say, why not more? And I think that's important, because great change happens when you have really, you have strong vision, ambitious goals, but there's a pathway to them, and you're making action towards them. Because we can also get into this comfort zone where we're not making enough change. And the reality is the challenges we face need urgency. On the other hand, we can set goals so far out from the realm of achievability that we just give up and it all becomes apathetic, right? And we just give up. We're like, the problem is too big to solve.
Yeah.
And taking a leap from project management, again, the idea is you take the big thing and you break it down into smaller parts and smaller goals. And then you're like, okay, let's do this. And one of my favorite examples is the story of there's a young man on the side of a beach throwing starfish back in. And an older person comes and says, there's millions of them. It doesn't make a difference. And the young man says, well, it makes a difference to this one. So the thing is that it's good to be, worried about having big concerns, but then coming back to the scope and the circle of influence and saying, okay, what are the actionable points? And let's start today.
Yeah.
And let's then do something tomorrow. And let's make sure we're moving as fast as we can towards the change.
I love that. And that partly answers my next question. But I wonder if there's anything beyond that as well with how do you, with your ambitious goals and breaking them down, how do you bring your team with you on that? What does it take to make your vision, your big ambition, a shared one?
So it's a great question. And I think, coming back to what we were talking about earlier, I believe the challenge that we face with all the change, all the technological speed, it's actually a culture and people one and leadership one first, and then secondly, a technological one. And ultimately, it comes down to the culture. We've always had a very open, transparent, and culture where we're generally looking for two-way feedback, right? So obviously, the vision is there, and the vision's big and it's set, and it's set somewhat from the leadership team. However, every year, like even when we came up with these goals, it came from a process of asking the whole team, right? What should our 2030 goals be? And then actually coming together as a team and pairing them back, right? And voting on them and finding, 6 or 7 goals that made sense, and then narrowing them down as a team. Because it's really important. I think, some leaders do it just as a buy-in exercise, and that's okay. But it's stronger when you genuinely realize that obviously the leadership team holds certain information and certain constraints that the rest of the team might not have. That's important. But everyone else also has a lot to offer. They're often at the front end, so they can tell us what's practical, what's not practical. They might even have insights. Also, they have a diverse experience, lived experience, diverse values. So that all is really, really valuable if you see it in the right way. So we have a very strong culture around that. However, we also know that, okay, once we've committed, so we debate vigorously, but once we've committed, then we all disagree and commit. It's like, these are the goals now, right? Whether you like them or not. But we have a robust debate. We seek, and one of the things we tell all our people leaders is that it's the leader's job to seek differing opinions. One of our favorite books from a teaching point of view is Patrick Lencioni's 5 Dysfunctions, right? Which the first one's trust, lack of trust, but the second one is fear of disagreement, right? So if I'm sitting in a meeting, I try to often do this or have a leadership team member pull me up where everyone's just agreeing. I'm like, are we we're not following the right process? Because when you're making a decision and you're seeking input, you're really looking for a difference of opinion, right? We're not trying to just have the same opinion everywhere. Because that leads to better outcomes, that leads to better decisions. There's a rich.
That's leadership.
That is leadership, right? That, especially if that's your culture and genuine culture, right?
But it's not often led that way.
It's difficult, right? it is difficult. We all including myself, like the sound of my own voice and people agreeing. But over time, I think if you build a culture, right, and also appreciate it. So one of the things, when somebody has a differing opinion, you should appreciate it and say, oh, thank you for saying that, right? Or thank you, or even seek it out, right? So, sometimes just say, okay, we're not looking for agreement. We're actually looking for disagreement. However, there is a counterpoint to that in the sense that That's the first point of the process. The second point of leadership is that often we end up choosing, right? There's different leadership styles, but some leaders may end up choosing an opinion that's not the best opinion in line with the brand and the strategy, but the least disliked opinion.
Mm-hmm.
That's also not good, right? Because typically, any consequential decisions, great decisions, they're typically, where 30% of people are really against it and 70% are really for it. You don't want a position or a decision where everyone's like, no one really likes it and everyone tolerates it.
Yeah.
So the idea is that it's not also meant to lead to this sort of where you're not actually choosing the best course of action for social cohesion.
Yeah.
And that's also part of the culture. And our team over time, it's never easy. The idea is that, it's not about, the goal is not to choose my opinion or your opinion. The choose is the best opinion for the company.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not, and then we disagree and commit. And that's also really important.
That's a really impressive and inspiring approach. My question is, I mean, you talked about you're about 70 to 80 people, medium-sized. Do you think you can continue that approach as Pablo and Rusty's grows?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that because I think, as we grow, we would want to continue it. I think it can be continued, I think. However, with some caveats, meaning you can't do that for every decision.
Mm.
And part of this is also a leadership discipline. Some decisions are best not made at the leadership level.
Yeah.
Right? Some decisions have to be delegated down to the team, and they can do this. Some decisions have to be made at the leadership level, or they have to have leadership veto capabilities because they might be completely out of the strategy or the product and strategy fit. It's also about analyzing big consequential decisions and one-way decisions versus two-way decisions. So a lot of this, and obviously there was a time we were a single leadership layer, and now we already have a few. So we've tried to keep it and thought deeply about it to say, how do we do this? And I think some of that is definitely scalable. However, it is about, obviously, can the leadership decision, can all decisions be made as a company at that scale? No, that's just, it's wasted time. Just like not every project, like a project, classically, you should be able to share a pizza with the project team. There's a right number, typically 8 to 12. Beyond that, projects are really hard to control.
Yeah.
So similarly, decision making, it's true, right? You get the right people in, but for the big decisions, you do that as a company, and we do that as part of our annual vision cycle. But there's some smaller decisions that a few people can do. You delegate them, right? And so it's about really keeping the culture in the various teams and training the leaders and the teams to do that.
It'll be an interesting one to watch as the company develops. I think that'll be fascinating. Now, I want to circle back to something you talked about earlier. Pablo and Rusty's sits in an interesting position. You're working directly with cafes who, as you've said, they're under enormous financial pressure right now. What was that margin you were talking about?
It's under 3% according to IBIS.
Under 3%, that's crazy. And you've talked about that financial pressure. Part of the contributing reason is coffee pricing. So you've been vocal about the cafe pricing conversation being avoided. What's at stake if the industry doesn't have that conversation?
It's a great point. And, I was writing a lot about this late last year and early this year. And I think the first perspective is, let's take the community and the consumer perspective, right? So what's at stake from a Australian culture suburb point of view? And I think every time I walk, I try to see, my suburb has about 6 cafes. And in Sydney, which is a very unique Sydney thing, those cafes are typically open at 5:36. Right? That's actually not the case around Australia, but Sydney is unique. And it's a key part of everyone's life and lifestyle, whether you're drinking tea or coffee. And, if you just sit and watch, you have a crowd that comes in the morning, and then you have a crowd that comes in the late morning, and a crowd that comes at, in sort of lunchtime and then early afternoon. And there's people's, there's friendships and meetings and all these things happening. And it's a key aspect of what modern Australian life's become. And also the the quality of coffee is actually exceptional. Take it from somebody that grew up in North America. And every time our staff travel to Europe, they come back and they're like, oh, wait, we thought European coffee would be better. But Australian coffee is just exceptionally good. So now imagine that one day you're going to your suburb and you go and you look at the first cafe and your favorite local and they're closed. And you go to the next one and they're closed. You go to the next one and they're closed. And you're like, what's happening? You call your friend and you're like, hey, Bob, all these cafes are closed. And he's like, yeah, didn't you read the news that they're shutting down because cost pressures, coffee prices are not big enough? It's like, oh, well, if I knew, I would have paid $1 more. Or, we're not asking for the parity. We're just saying a little bit more. So I think it's quite important to the Australian culture. And this is without the 500,000 people that work in the sector. And what's unique about the Australian coffee culture and the cafe culture is that 80 to 85% of them are independents, mom and pop cafes. They're not big chains. So that money is right in the community. It's owned by real people living in the community typically, or living nearby and employing local people. So I think it's quite important from that point of view. From an industry point of view, and I'm not saying coffee prices are everything. There's also lease concerns. There's other things, red tape, all these things. But from an industry point of view, I think there's this mindset. And why the mindset's there, I don't know. However, there's this real misunderstanding, coming back to the love of money, to understand the difference between revenue and profit, right? So a lot of the industry is addicted to volume, meaning a lot of cafes, they're looking at how busy they are, right? And they're not looking to say sometimes. And cafe owner is one of the hardest jobs, I believe. You have to be the lease agent, you have to be the HR manager, you have to be the work, you have to be the payroll administrator, you have to do all these things, right? For a relatively small business, so it's quite hard. However, there's this misnomer that if we're busy, we're doing well, right? And it's like, that makes no sense. And coming back to the importance of strategy, it's like, are you trying to have the best, give a really amazing experience? If so, it's okay to charge a couple of dollars more.
Yeah.
Or are you trying to be the cheap and fast? There's no wrong answers here, but everything has to be in alignment, because then, it's like, it doesn't matter if your competitor is charging $5. You can charge $5.50. And if your competitor is, charging $7 for a sandwich, you can charge $8.50 and let the consumers decide. And it's okay to have 20 less customers, right?
Yeah.
But serve them well.
Yeah.
You'll still be more profitable.
Yeah.
Everything else being equal, right? The other big thing is, the first thing cafe owners do is sign a lease, typically with very little advice. Once the lease is set, that's a permanent fixed cost, very hard to get out of. So that's another conversation. But everything else being equal, my message to the industry in general, but cafes in specific, is that not every cafe is the same, and they're not providing the same experience. It's okay to price yourself based on the experience and let the customers decide. And here's the irony. If you're trying to be a really community-focused, slightly more premium experience, by charging too less, you get all sort of customers. Those that want the premium experience and don't just want a quick, cheap coffee. And that means you're actually underserving the premium customers and overserving the non-premium customers. So when you charge a little bit more, you can actually now, wait times are less. You can have a conversation, you can get a better experience. So there's actually a bit of selection, self-selection there. And here's the other thing. A lot of cafes have, the great cafes that have put prices up, they're actually just as busy as they were before, if not busier. Because here's the funny thing. I believe Australians will not have a bad coffee, right? They don't want bad coffee.
No.
Right? So the question, if I ask you, hey,
you get a bad coffee once in one cafe,
and that's it. You lose them, right? So this is the irony. It's like, no, actually, you can pay your baristas a bit more, focus on quality, right? Because the money's got to come from somewhere. Because if you don't raise your prices, you choose lower quality ingredients, less staff, and now the same customer is not coming back because they're getting a worse experience. But the other thing is, I think questions are important and language is important. So if I asked you, Caroline, do you want higher coffee prices? Of course you don't. I don't. We're all suffering. we don't want to pay more. But if the question is about, hey, what do you want? Do you want to pay $1 more for your daily coffee, or have a worst coffee experience. Now you'll have a deeper think about it. And if I say, well, do you want to pay $1 more or not have the cafe exist tomorrow? Now it's a different question. So framing is really, really, really important. And, people think that cafe owners are, like driving Porsches, living in big mansions. It's not true.
Yeah.
At least not true for like 90% of them. There are a few really successful ones, and that's awesome. But most of them are just, they're probably not even middle income, right? The joke is, has it become an expensive hobby? And coming back to business, we have to look at profit, and you have to look at strategy. And there's no point running a business that's not going to be profitable. And from day one, you should price yourself for success and pay real importance to profit, and then let the market. We're not entitled to our customers' money. However, I believe, right, and we have extensive research to back this up. 50 cents to $1 is not going to make a difference if your experience is great. Because guess what? $2 coffee already exists. And if it was just a price thing, the only coffee that exists in Australia would be the $2 coffee.
Yeah.
Right? So people already have choices, and consumers should have more choices. But people should price themselves based on their vision and their strategy and their positioning, and let the customers decide.
Abdullah, you speak so eloquently about this issue, and clearly it's a critical one for the industry as a whole, because less cafes mean, that has an impact on your business as well. Are you actively campaigning on this at the moment?
We are. I think last year there was a lot of media around this, and this year too. So we will continue to talk about it, because we still think it is I coined the term the coffee value gap. And the reason is because ultimately it's not just about pricing. It's about how cafe owners value themselves and how we value our coffee culture. Our coffee culture is the envy of the world. But currently it's at 40% lower than the rest of the world. And no one's asking for parity. But number one is awareness, right? If you go back to change the ad car model, awareness is the first thing. And we're trying to do the heavy lifting things, sometimes sensationally, right? Like you'll get the headline that is coffee going to $12, and everyone gets like really worried about it, but it gets people's attention. So the first thing is awareness, and we need all the help here, and media's been quite friendly, and that's good. But we need people to just understand, pay attention to coffee when you travel internationally. You'll be surprised how much you're paying. And pay attention to the quality. And people are doing it tough, so we can't assume that everyone will keep paying, but at least have that appreciation to say your cafe and their teams are actually doing it tough to keep that coffee at $5. And then to the cafes, what we're saying is that you have to value yourself and what you do and your teams a bit more. Don't feel so afraid to say your customers won't pay 50 cents more. So, because what sort of business do you have if you think 50 cents will just lose all customers?
I love this conversation. Here's one of the key reasons. When we talk about purpose-led business, a lot of people think about the more obvious impact that you give through giving back, through sustainability, through DEI, all of these things. But when you talk about Pablo and Rusty's changing the world for the better, you're also talking about a thriving industry, a sustainable industry in the holistic sense that, is great for employment, is great for lifestyle, as you talked about, and community. And, that is the true test of a purpose-driven business, isn't it? That it is fighting the good fight to make sure that the industry is alive and well and doing and being as sustainable as it can.
Definitely. Again, it's not a popular topic because understandably no one wants prices to go up.
No.
However, it's an important discussion because community is a key stakeholder and our customers are a key stakeholder. And it's more about bringing the awareness and let them choose. It's not about guilting them in sporting cafes. It's not about saying, you must pay $7 or $8 for a coffee, but it's to say, hey, here's a problem. And we have to solve it together somehow. But if we value the coffee culture that we have and the community that cafes as a third space provide, then we have to solve this for all of us. right? And I think awareness is the starting point of it. Because once we have the awareness, at least even if we can't afford that coffee, we won't have this negative impression of the cafes when they're trying to do what they need to do to survive.
Well said. And you've certainly changed my thinking on this. Like if I'd gone to a cafe and the price had gone up, I'd be moaning. But that won't happen now based on what you've shared here. That's really valuable. Now, we're on the hour. We're out of time. I didn't even have a chance to talk about, to get you to talk about an article that I read that you wrote in LinkedIn last year, I think it was, in June 2025, Lessons in Purpose. What I do want to do is highlight it here. I'm going to share a link to it in the show notes because there's some really valuable perspectives that you share in there, which I would love our listeners to have a look at. But for now, I'd love you, well, first of all, thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for being so open. It's been a really fascinating discussion for me, and I've really appreciated it. Abdullah, I'd love you to close the show, first of all, with any additional thoughts you'd like to share, including if you want to invite our listeners to do anything in particular. So maybe start with that, and then if you could end with Abdullah's dream. 5 years from now, if you could achieve your greatest ambitions through the vehicle of business, what might it look like?
Great question. So first one, I think in terms of, since we were on the coffee discussion, have a chat with your cafe owner. Just tell them how much they mean to you. If they're doing a good job, right? If they're a key part of the society, because they are really doing it tough, and they're scared and between a rock and a hard place where they costs are too much and they think their customers will leave if they change pricing. So that'll go a long way. Second is, I think if you're trying to start a purpose-driven business, or you work in one, or you're trying to change whatever you're doing for the better, or you're a purpose-driven leader, don't sell yourself short. It can be done. It just means we all have a bit extra to do, right? Because it's a little bit harder, but don't give it up. And I think in 5 years, my dream, just two dreams. One is I want to see Pablo Rusty's really start making, I think we've already made a huge impact in Australia, but also to shape the global narrative, to have the ripple of the changes we're trying to do. And we're not alone and we're not perfect, but the ripple of that change go beyond our shores and go across the world. And for me personally, I love, that Lessons in Purpose that was on the back of a conference that I gave, because we have the scar tissue, and scar tissue is great. To say, it's not about profit or purpose. It's about profit and purpose. And to link it back to your podcast, it is about love and profit and purpose. And these are and statements. These are not or, because when done right, they reinforce each other. And I want to make a meaningful contribution to tell more leaders and businesses how to navigate what we've learned and what I've learned about navigating these, and to get better at that, because I think we're at the start of a big movement, and the younger generation are extremely inspiring. And to give them the frameworks on how they can balance this and then go out in the world, in their workplace, in starting new ventures, to make sure these are non-negotiables and these are and statements.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the For Love and Money podcast. If you'd like to take a deeper dive into the purpose movement, visit us at thecauseeffect.com.au. And remember, doing good is good for business. So if you're not doing good, then what are you doing?